Kia ora, my name is Jess. I'm in the External Communications team here at the FMA, and you're joining me in our Jess Learns to Invest podcast series. I'm 27 years old, and to be completely honest, I don't know anything about investing. So if you're like me and you find it a little bit overwhelming, follow me in this journey. I'm going to be having a new guest speaker every month. I'm super excited to introduce our first guest on episode 1 of Jess Learns to Invest. I'm so excited to have Sim here, the founder of That Invest. I thought who better to help me on my investing journey than Sim. So we're going to kind of do an investing basics today. And I'm really, really excited to kind of learn about how you started That Invest, because not only do you have a book, you have the leading podcast for investing. And I heard you were Young New Zealander of the Year this year. Am I right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I'm a little bit starstruck, a little bit. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Before we kind of kick off and do our little investing 101, just tell me where your investing journey started. Like, when did you think I'm going to start investing?
That's such a great question, and thank you for having me on. This is so awesome. I love the name, by the way, of the podcast.
It's got to be catchy, you know?
It is catchy. I love it. I started my journey when I was in university. And
wow, so quite young.
Yeah, quite a few years ago. And I remember I didn't grow up with parents that were very financially savvy in terms of like saving, and they were very good at live below your means. We didn't have a lot growing up until, as their salaries slowly started to increase. My mum's a teacher and my dad's an engineer. Slowly over time, as things improved, then they would spend a bit more. So they would only buy cars in cash. And if they couldn't afford it, then we didn't get a nice car. So a lot of times growing up at school, I could tell my parents were here because it would be the squeaking van, screeching down the road. And I'm like, my dad's here to pick me up. And so they were always like, save, save, save. And so I always believed that's what you need to do. You go to university, you get a good job, and you save. And that's the way to grow your wealth. But I think it was in university, I had a friend tell me, they were like, hey, one of my friends is investing and he's been able to pay off his medical school loan by investing. And the first time I heard that, I was like, well, that guy's dad works in finance and my family doesn't, so it's not for me. I'll never learn. And I kind of put it to the side. And then in university, I had a few finance papers that I took. In the University of Auckland, they make you do electives, so papers that are outside of your degree, because I was studying healthcare. I was becoming
very different.
Optometrist, very different. And then I went on and I was like, I like this. So I did some executive education papers from Yale, which are free to do. Yeah. And it was on financial markets. And it was for me to understand, I need to get this money thing sorted out. And I remember watching the lectures and getting angry because I was like, this stuff is so much easier than I thought. And I was like, why did I spend so many years kind of pushing to the side this investing thing? I used to think a portfolio was a physical book.
I still kind of do. I'm not going to lie.
Well, that's what this episode is about. I used to think a portfolio was a physical book that you'd open up and you'd have clear files of your investments.
No, I can picture it. Yeah.
So that's how I started. And, I took the education, I took the time, and I started investing, and it just grew from there. I was able to purchase my first home from investing at 23. And
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And so that was how my journey began.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because I had a similar upbringing in the sense of my parents taught me how to save, and I'm very good at saving, not to boast, but I think I'm good at saving, but never have I thought about investing. My kind of mindset is I work super hard for my money. There's a bit of fear and anxiety about spending it and putting it somewhere that I can't see it. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting that that's kind of how you started as well. So I'm kind of keen to know, where did Girls That Invest come out of this? Did you start by investing and then you kind of could see the benefit of it, and then you thought you were going to educate other people? How did you get into the space of educating women? Because it's just so cool, to make something that in my mind is quite a hard topic to understand, and you're making it understandable for people.
I think for me, it ended up being a light bulb moment when, as I was going through my investing journey, and it was this was around 2020 when I started looking for more communities like mine. COVID had hit. Yeah. I was I really enjoy being an investor, but now I'm stuck at home, kind of online.
Yeah.
So I try to find online investing communities because it's fun to be able to share with other people, what you're doing, looking at what they're doing. And I couldn't find anything that spoke to me. There were online communities, but they were very like finance bro-y, if I can say that, like very like crypto focused or like Elon Musk focused. And there was nothing wrong with those things, but I was just like, this is really, I don't relate to this. And when I would go to investor events, pre-2020, I just wouldn't go because these investing clubs were so, I don't know, like masculine.
Yeah. You do picture kind of men in suit and investing. I'm like, I don't fit into that kind of world.
Yeah, I'm gonna wear a top and jeans and like white sneakers. Like I don't feel like I belong here.
Yeah.
And that was my own mental, barrier.
Totally.
No, I don't think anyone would have been like, get out. So that's when I realized if there wasn't a community I could find of other female investors, like maybe I can just make it and share what I'm reading. So coming from a healthcare background, I was like, in the healthcare world, we learn by looking at research papers and we look at studies, and based on the studies, that's how we treat disease.
Yeah.
And you don't say, this person has an eye problem, let me give them, this drug because it feels right. You go, okay, the studies have shown this is the best way to do it. So I started this podcast called Girls That Invest, and I got my best friend to join me, and we would just read these studies. She worked in finance. I had the healthcare background. We'd read these studies and go, okay, the studies show that like these are the best ways to invest, or these things work, or this is what analysts are saying. And just by sharing the information in an easy to understand way, I think it just really resonated with people that were looking for that.
Yeah, it's so cool because, I'm not going to lie, when I started kind of looking into it and when I read your book, I was kind of terrified because the topic itself just seems quite overwhelming to me. And I'm like, like you said, like I just don't feel like I fit into that world. But I love how you compare it to other things and it makes it understandable. And so that's what I'm really keen to do today, is just kind of break it down into simple terms so that people can maybe feel a little bit less scared like me.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm so excited.
So let's kick off by, could you give me like a little brief explanation of just what is investing? Because I feel like everyone's got their own perception of what it is, like I just picture a building with like screens that have numbers on it and little up and down arrows. And I'm like, I'm sure it's totally not like that at all. I'm sure you can do it online these days, but I'm like, what actually is it?
Honestly, I think we all had that experience growing up. Like if you watched movies like The Big Short, Wolf of Wall Street, those, they don't make it seem accessible.
Totally.
And you look at those, and if you don't relate to that, you go, well, I guess I just will keep saving my money and not investing it. I think a simple way to think about investing is it is just a vehicle where you put in money on the hopes, not the guarantee, but the hopes that it gives you a return. So you put in $100 into a vehicle and you would hope that maybe that turns into $110. That's all it is. And what that vehicle is can be different types of asset classes. So it can be, I'm sure we'll talk about it. It could be shares, it could be property, it could be a expensive handbag that goes up in value. Like investments in themselves are a loose term. But the idea is you're putting money in the hopes that more money comes out the other side.
Yeah. I think a lot of people's fear is that there's not going to be more money out the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was wondering, like, for someone like me who's like just starting out, would you say it would be a good idea to invest like a little amount if you're beginning? Or does that not matter too much, how much you're putting in?
I think the amount you put in makes a huge difference, because if you can put in a small amount that you are comfortable losing, and I say comfortable losing not because you will 100% lose it, but you don't want to be putting in your whole life savings. You want to start off with a small amount, and then as you see those shares go up or down, you'll start to realize, am I investing in something that is in alignment with my risk tolerance? And I think that's a really good way to think about investing, because it's a spectrum of risk. So you can have some investment styles like investing in bonds, or even investing in term deposits where, these are cash or cash equivalents, where your money's not going to go up and down too much. And then you might move over into the middle where you're investing in funds, which are basket filled with lots of different companies. And some companies go up, some companies go down, kind of balances out. And that has a little bit more risk, but also a little bit more return.
Yeah.
And then you keep moving down the scale, and that's where you have like individual companies or cryptocurrency or growth stocks that can do really well, but also can drop quite a bit. And so since there's a spectrum of investing, you can sit anywhere on the spectrum and be an investor. You don't have to be all the way on this end.
Yeah, right. So like if you're not a very risky person, like I'm very careful about all the decisions I make. You can still invest. You don't have to go for like the most risky option. You can kind of play it safe and kind of dip your toe into it before you kind of, yeah.
I like to think of investing like going to the gym, and it really feels the exact same for me, where if you go to the gym, you're not going to go straight to the weights section where all the guys are, and you're not going to
don't know what you're doing.
You're not going to start, lifting the weights the way they are. You're probably going to start on the treadmill, and you're probably going to start by walking, and then you might make it an incline walk, and then you might start running. But, you start off on one side, you're both still at the gym, but you don't have to start all the way at the end.
That's such a good way to put it. Like I never would have thought of it like that. I think you touched into this a little bit, but what are the different types of investments that people can make? Because you talked a little bit about handbags as well, and I never would have thought that would be an investment. And now I'm like, cool, I might have a reason that I can go and buy an expensive handbag. Yes.
Oh, no. Take what I say with a grain of salt with handbags. But the way that you can invest is there's different styles. And I like to think of investing like a menu. And when you go to a restaurant, there's a menu of different things. And one of the things you've probably heard about are stocks or shares, and they're the same thing. They're just different terms. There's so much jargon in the investing world.
Yep, that's the hard part for me, is all the jargon.
I feel like they make it so difficult for no reason.
Yeah.
Like they'll say things like, so-and-so has raised $1 million in capital. And you're like, wow, a capital raise. That sounds really impressive. It just means they raised money.
Is that what that means? Okay. I didn't actually know that.
It just means they've gone around to investors and said, hey, can like the way Girl Guides go around and like get money to fundraise for something, like you're just fundraising money, but capital just means money.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
So there's a lot of jargon that gets thrown around.
I think that's also what kind of puts people off a little bit, is that all the terms, and like I don't know what different things are. Like stocks and the stock market are different things, but I'm just like, how do you explain that they're different?
Yeah.
What are they?
So that's such a good question. We've got different types of styles of investing. So you've got shares or stocks.
Yeah.
And think of them like a small piece of a company. And let's say this company A, and they sell phones, and they sell laptops. And you go, okay, I want to buy a small piece of them, and it's like owning one brick of that company. And if the company does well over time, then hopefully the value of the small piece goes up. And think of it like an online certificate. You just have a little certificate that says you own, a very small percent. Owning one share of a company doesn't mean that you can go into their store and be like, hey, I think we should change this. Like, I'm an owner. I want to change that. There's probably millions and millions and millions of shares, but you get to own one of them. And if the share does well or does poorly, your money does well or poorly. So that's one way to think about shares. Then another investment that you have is what we call bonds. And bonds are lower risk than shares, but unfortunately at lower returns. And bonds are when you get to act like a bank, and you get to say, hey, I will loan you $1,000. And usually it's the government or large corporations that you give this money to. And they say, thank you so much. Thank you for the $1,000. I will pay it back, and I'll give you like maybe 2% or 3% or 4% with that. Now, usually governments and large companies aren't going to risk losing your money, but on the downside, you won't get much return because you're not risking that much.
Yeah.
So those are shares and bonds. And then you might think to yourself, okay, well, maybe I could invest in shares, but like, where would I even begin? Like, what's a good share? What's a bad share? What's an ethical share? And it gets quite overwhelming. And so people invented what we call funds, which are a basket filled with lots of different shares. And rather than picking and choosing a company that would be really good or really poor, because it's very difficult to predict, you can invest in a piece of a basket. And by buying a piece of that basket, you're buying a piece of all the companies in that fund.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if you've heard of like the NZX50
Yeah.
and you invest in a NZX50 fund, you've got a basket filled with the top 50 companies in New Zealand. And so maybe one company does really well a single year, but maybe another company does poorly. It balances out a lot more because you've got a basket of 50.
Right. So when someone's like choosing a company to invest in, do you kind of recommend that people do their research and choose something that they're passionate about rather than just, I want to make money fast, so I'm just going to pick, like how do you even start? Because like I'm starting to understand it, but I'm still like, I just wouldn't even know what step one would be in terms of choosing.
Step one would be thinking about what it is that you want to achieve and then working backwards. So it sounds counterintuitive, but rather than saying, what should I invest in to make money? It's what is the goal that I want? And then I work backwards. Because if you are someone that says, hey, maybe in 10 years' time, I want to have a house deposit and I want to invest for that, what you invest your money in will be different than if someone says, hey, I'm investing until I'm 65 for retirement, because you have a longer period of time to invest. And so you might be able to invest in more higher risk asset classes compared to someone that's investing for 10 years because you've got a shorter time frame.
Yeah.
So determining your goal and saying, well, I'd like to retire early. I'd like to retire by 50 rather than 65 because wouldn't that be nice?
That'd be nice. Yeah. That'd be great.
And then I need to have, X amount to retire. Maybe I need $700,000. Maybe I need $1 million. That sounds like a lot of money. But once you determine how much you need and you determine at what time frame you're working with, you can then go backwards and use calculators or even figure out, okay, well, to do that, I should probably invest in X or Y. Someone that is maybe, already an investor and they're thinking, I need to pull my money out next year, they're probably going to not be investing in a lot of individual companies because the market moves up and down a lot for individual companies. So they might be moving their money into bonds and more lower risk investments because they need that money next year. Imagine if it was 2019 and you needed to pull your money out in March 2020 and then the market crashed. That's very scary.
Yeah. Could you explain a little bit more about the markets crashing? Because it sounds scary, right? And that kind of also is like, oh, do I want to put my money into my hard-earned money into something that's, gonna, like, what do you do when that happens?
That's a really good question. If you ever go to like a family barbecue or an event and you say like, oh, I'm thinking of investing in shares, usually there's always like an uncle that just comes out of the woodworks and he's like, well, investing in shares is risky. And investing in shares, like I had a friend who lost all his money in the like 89 crash or this crash. There's so many stories like that. And I always like to say in those instances, you should ask a couple of questions. The first is, what did they invest in when they lost all their money? Did they put their money in a fund that invested across hundreds and thousands of companies? Or did they have all of their money in one or two companies that they were hoping would do well, that they didn't really do that much research in? And the second question is, did they listen to their financial advisors? Because the advisors at every single crash will often say, if you're investing in a broad market fund, so a fund that's investing in lots of companies, like the NZX 50 or the S&P 500, which is the top 500 companies in the US, if they're investing in these broad market funds, they should hold those investments. They shouldn't pull it out when the shares go down.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because people sort of panic, right, when that sort of thing happens, and so they just want their money back.
And so a lot of people, like in the 2008 crash, that's a crash that we remember to some degree, we saw it go down. And if you pulled your money out in that moment, you would have solidified your losses and been like, I just need to get out. I'm scared.
Yeah,
but if you'd spoken to a financial professional, they would have said, hold on to it, give it time. You've invested in the right kind of assets to begin with. It's in alignment with your risk profile. Just hold on, don't look at it. And there was a study done that looked at the best performances with investors. It was by a investment company called Fidelity in the US. And they found the people that had made the best investments, their investments had the highest returns, were people that had passed away. Because they weren't touching their funds.
Yeah.
Weren't moving them around.
Interesting. So it's better to kind of, once you've done it, leave it there.
buy and hold.
Yeah, okay. That's really good advice because, yeah, you do hear those stories, right, of that, crashes and people want their money out and it's sort of that panic. But, yeah, that's really good advice.
And while you can't guarantee that your money will not lose value, and that's part of the risk with investing, you can't have, your cake and eat it too. You can't be like, give me all the returns but no risk at all. But you can manage that risk by saying, well, I don't want to take on too much risk, so I'll invest in those, less risky asset classes.
Yeah. And why is investing so important? Because, yeah, like I said, it's kind of I'm 27 and it's only kind of recently that I've sort of been interested in it, and I'm still like skeptical a little bit. So I'm kind of keen to know, and for others who are also thinking, why would I even start? Like what's the importance of it?
The best way to think about the importance of investing is to maybe look at the alternative, which is keeping your money in cash and being like, well, let's just save it. And this is a stat that's more relevant to women, but we see male friends do it too, where 69% of women's wealth is kept in cash. We like cash because it makes us feel safe.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of our parents, it's a similar journey. Besides trying to own one property, they'll keep everything in cash too. The issue with keeping your money in cash is this thing called inflation, which when we first started talking about inflation at Girls That Invest, people were like, what is this word? And now over the last few years, because we've experienced such high inflation, it's like a everyday term. But for those that are listening in and still not quite sure on the definition of it, inflation is the idea that the value of your money loses purchasing power over time.
Oh, yeah.
So what you can buy with $10 10 years ago is a lot less than what you can buy with $10 today.
Yeah. It's like when people used to buy, houses, the house prices ages ago. It's like mind-blowing.
Or even like a cup of coffee. Like you could buy maybe one coffee for $7 now if you get like, an alternative milk.
Yeah.
But 10 years ago you could buy two. So it's the same $10. You just can't buy as much. And usually inflation is around 2 to 3% every year. That's normal. We expect that. And it chips away. But what it means is that if you have $1,000 in your savings account and that account is earning no interest, that's 2% of the value of that chipping away every single year.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. Because all my savings is sitting in this one savings account. So I'm kind of like mentally taking notes like, oh my goodness, I should be doing something with it.
And if you have, an interest rate on it and you're earning some interest, that's awesome. But you also want to make sure the interest rate that you're earning matches or is more than the inflation rate. So last year, if inflation is, if no matter where you live in the world, if it's more than 3%, but your online interest, account is giving you 3%, then you're not really making any money, even though it feels like it.
Yeah.
And so the reason why people invest is because if interest rates are usually around 2 to 3% on average, and this isn't a guarantee because past performance does not guarantee future success, if you expect that the market makes a 7% return and inflation chips away 2% of it, then you have a 5% buffer.
Right, yeah.
And so that's why people invest rather than just keeping it all in cash.
Yeah. So if people are listening and they're like, and they kind of relate to what I was saying about having just one account with all my savings in it, where would you tell them to start? So like, obviously you should, I believe in like doing your research before you just go out there and start investing, but is it a good idea to sort of have a rainy day fund as well? Like I imagine you wouldn't just throw all that savings at investing. Well, I would be too terrified to do that, but
that would be so scary.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, imagine if, like your car broke down or you needed like an emergency tooth canal or something. And
I hope not, but yeah.
Those things are not cheap. You don't want to have that money tied up in shares that you have to then sell and hope that someone else on the other side buys it at the time that you need, and then you have to transfer that money into your normal account. That can take a couple of days. And so when you're investing, the way that I like to do it is I like to have 3 months of cash. 3 months of cash that I would need to survive. So my mortgage, my bills, my groceries, have that in a savings account in my bank account that I can just pull if I need it. And I think that gives me so much comfort because cash does feel good.
Yeah.
Just to know like it's there. If anything happens, you can just, get out of any situation or help out someone in need. So I always like to have 3 to 6 months in that. And then once that has built up, then I believe that investing is a really good option, because on top of that, you don't really, if you don't really need that cash and you're thinking, okay, I'd rather put it towards that goal that I have, whether it's to retire early, to get a home deposit, maybe I have kids and I want to start putting money aside for my children, then that money can start going towards the goal that you've set for yourself.
Yeah, cool. And if people have, like, I paid off my student loan this year, which was such a nice feeling.
Congratulations.
I was so happy. I was like, yes. But if people out there still are paying off their student loan, they've got mortgages, things like that, that shouldn't be a reason to just not invest, right? That shouldn't hold us back from investing.
There's two things to think about when you're weighing up, where should I put my money? The first is investing makes more of a compounding effect the younger you start, because when you invest a small amount when you're younger, what you experience is this thing called compound interest, which is every single year your investments that you've put in, the $10 a week, that makes, let's say, 10% return, just for the sake of easy numbers, because 7% would do my head in. I'm trying to do that math.
I'm not good with numbers, so yeah, keep it simple.
you make, let's say, a 10% return on that, $10. That's awesome. But the year after that, you not only make a 10% return on your initial $10, you also make a 10% return on the 10% that you made the year before.
Yeah, okay.
And so it starts to go up over time, and you experience this sort of exponential rate of growth, which on average is not a guarantee, but on average can look like the money that you invest starting to double every 10 years. And so the more 10 years that you have, the better your investment outcomes look like.
Yeah.
And if you're investing for fewer decades, then you need to start putting in a bit more money to have the same return.
Gotcha, yeah.
So on one hand, investing when you're young, even if you don't have a lot, is a good place to start. But on the second hand, the other thing that you want to think about is what we call the 7% rule. So if you have debt, not all debt is bad debt.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really hard thing to wrap my head around.
Yeah, because you tend to think debt is, that's a bad word. Like, you don't want debt. Like, yeah.
Right? And to be debt-free is like this sort of mental, I don't know, like clarity that you're just like, I don't want that. Like, get off me. And so debt growing up can feel like a really bad thing, but you will over time like learn that there is good debt and bad debt, and it is okay to not pay off all of your good debt before you start investing. Now that sounds really confusing.
Yeah, I'm like, well, give me an example of good debt.
Good debt is things that can, in New Zealand, that can be your student loans. Some people like to pay them off because it's done.
Just get it done.
It does help with being able to get a larger home loan if you want to buy a house one day. So there's other reasons why you might want to pay off your student loan. But things like student loans and things like a mortgage that has an interest rate of less than 7%, those are things that you can still keep paying off and also start investing. You don't have to own a home completely outright before you start investing, because that's going to take like 30 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, it would take a while.
That would take a while. Now, if your mortgage on your house is like 6% or 6.5%, it's getting closer to that 7% mark, that's when you might go, this year I might want to focus on paying down that mortgage, because if you expect that the shares that you make only around about will give you a 7% return, but paying down your debt pays that off by 6.5, that's very similar. Whereas if your mortgage is like 2%, you're one of those lucky people that locked in.
I was going to say, that sounds nice.
Then if your mortgage is at 2%, but you could make more money in the share market at 7%, then you might take that money and invest it. Now, bad debt is usually debt that is at a higher rate than 7%. So this is things like car loans. This is things like credit card debt. This is things like, the buy now, pay later options that you still need to pay off. And if you don't, there's a high interest rate associated with it. That's the sort of stuff you want to pay off first, because otherwise, if you're investing, it's a little bit like pouring water into a bucket with a leaky bottom.
Yeah. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, okay, this sounds really good, I want to look at investing, what kind of tools are there? Because I know there's some sites online, right, that are kind of quite user-friendly. Are they good to do it that way, or where would you go?
It can seem really overwhelming. If you Google how do I invest and you type that onto Google, you get so overwhelmed because you click on one thing and it leads to you're like, wait, what is this about? And then you click on an article and then you go in, and by the end of the day, you're like, you feel like you've learned all these words, and you get analysis paralysis, and you get overwhelmed, and you go onto Netflix and you're like, this is a problem for another day.
Let's just switch off.
I'll sort this out later. And so I think the best way to learn how to invest is to take a look at yourself and figure out, how do you like learning? Because someone might say, Sim, I'm just a fast reader. I need written content. And to that I would say, well, we've got the Sorted website.
Yeah, Sorted's great.
Sorted, has so many great written articles. They're really easy to understand, and you can learn from that. You might then go, well, no, I don't really like reading. I'm on the go. I'm quite busy. I drive a lot, and I'm an auditory learner. And then the answer to that is, well, podcasts. Podcasts like these are a really great place to learn. And for someone else, they might say, I like video content, and then that's a case of finding reputable videos online that you can watch. So it really comes down to what your style of learning is. And then once you figure that out, going, okay, let's make sure that where I'm going is something that I trust, something that, has good reviews. And
the trust part's really important. So there's so many scams that scares me as well.
There's so many
making
scams.
sure that, you're choosing a good source.
But you can't go wrong with Sorted. I think that's, if you're a beginner, they have a good glossary of terms, they have calculators, and they also really focus on, what's your goal? Do you want to pay down your debt? Do you want to get a mortgage? Do you want to retire? And using the calculators lets you figure out, good places to begin. And with the fear of scams and the fear of, am I going to be, led astray, FMA has a lot of resources too, where they share information.
Totally.
And, there's been times where I've seen something, I've been not too sure, I've searched it up on the FMA website, and it tells me everything I need to know.
Yeah. I was also keen to kind of know if someone is listening and they're still not kind of sold on the idea of investing, because I know a lot of people think investing is gambling. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh,
because that's kind of where my brain went when I first thought of investing as well.
Which makes sense because, again, you think about the movies, you think about, what you see online, and I promise you investing is not having 5 different screens with all these numbers and the arrows and the, charts. That is not what the everyday investor looks like. If that is what it took for me to invest, I'm too lazy for that. I don't want to wake up at 5 a.m. and be at the same time zone as the American markets. That's too much. Investing is not like gambling, but there are different styles of investing that can seem that way. And so there's a style of investing called speculative investing, where you buy something because you just kind of cross your fingers and hope that it will do well because either your friend told you about it. FOMO investing is big. I know the FMA did a report that came out and showed that almost 1 in 3 young people bought shares or an investment based off the fear of missing out.
Yeah, it's such a big thing for our generation.
Which is really scary.
True, yeah.
And so there's that kind of style of investing where you put some money in, cross your fingers and go, God, I really just hope this doesn't go to zero. And that can feel like gambling. And to a degree, I think that is, not the best option if you want to grow long-term wealth in a slow and sort of sustainable way. But gambling is also something that you do without a lot of research. There's only luck involved. You can't study gambling, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah,
you can't.
I don't think you can.
You can maybe try and guess if the person opposite you has a poker face or not. But besides that,
it's all random, isn't it?
It's all random. At least you hope it is. And then with investing, you're looking at funds or you're looking at shares and you're doing research and you're looking at these, reports. If you find an individual company that you like, you're looking at their balance sheet. And so there's a lot more research involved, and therefore there's a lot more choice, whereas gambling is purely chance.
So I feel like we've done a really good high level of sort of what investing is and different types of investments. Could you talk a little bit of investment strategies, like the difference between long-term investing, for example, short-term investments, things like that?
Of course. So the main 2 strategies in the investing world, you can think of them as I always imagine them as like the Apple and the Android drama. Like there's two sides that are very strong.
Yeah. You
And
either love Apple
or you love
yeah.
Android, or you just hate Apple and you love
yeah.
it. You know, there's just something really intense about these. And the two identities in the investing world are the passive investors and the active investors.
I keep hearing passive and active. I've heard them,
that?
but I feel like I still haven't grasped each concept in terms of finances.
Well, it's very in the name. And so there's two sides of investors that think that their investing style is right. And the answer is neither is right or wrong, but there are pros and cons of both of them. The active investors are people that think, I can pick and choose companies that I think will do well, and I can guesstimate where they're going to go and what's going to happen long term. So I'm going to put my money into that. And so active fund managers are people that, you know, they spend their whole day working on speaking with different companies, speaking with customers, speaking with clients, and figuring out what is the best portfolio that I can make for my investors, for my clients. And they're going to spend a lot of time doing research, so they're going to charge a little bit more money. And doing so doesn't necessarily mean their higher fees will result in better outcomes, but for some people, you know, they want that more of a handheld approach. The other style of investing is passive investing, which is the belief that you can't figure out where the market is going to go. So rather than trying to beat the investing market, rather than trying to beat what the share market is going to do, you just want to invest in it. If it does well, your shares do well. If it does poorly, your shares do poorly. And so that's when they use often like computerized systems where it will track an indice like the S&P 500 or the NZX 50. And so your portfolio is just made up of those companies. It's computerized, so it's a lot cheaper.
And for a new investor, is having a diverse portfolio a good thing to sort of focus on? And I know you've talked a little bit about that already, but yeah, is that a good thing to focus on? And then what exactly does that mean?
That's such a good question. When you compare active versus passive investing styles, the studies have found that if you're going to actively invest and you're going to pick and choose, you should at least pick and choose 25 different companies to have in your portfolio. That is a lot of research, time, energy, and you have to get it right 25 times.
Yeah.
Which is very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so that is an option. And if someone thinks, I want to take that punt, you know, that's one way of doing it. My personal preference is diversifying in a passive way, because I really like to imagine myself as just a lazy investor where I pick and choose funds that have funds that are baskets with lots of different companies in them. And that way, my companies are across all different 11 sectors. So in the investing world, there's 11 sectors that you can think about, like education, healthcare, real estate, IT. And in some years, maybe IT as a sector does really well, like in the last couple of years. But, you know, 5 years before that, IT wasn't doing very well, and we had better performances seen in things like healthcare and real estate. And so rather than trying to pick and choose what companies are doing well or pick and choose which sectors are doing well, I would rather invest in a fund with hundreds or thousands of companies and let the diversification do its work. Because if you imagine, you know, it being 2020, if I had just invested in like real estate companies and hotels and like airline stocks, I would be very upset.
Yeah.
But if you'd invested in like this new up-and-coming company called Zoom that not many people had heard about, and Microsoft, your shares would have done really well. But by investing in a basket, even though my airline shares did poorly, those little Zoom shares that I had in that basket did well, and it balanced it out.
Okay, yeah, I kind of get that now, because I'm thinking like people might listen to that and be like, oh my God, that's terrifying then to hear because you can't predict those things, right? Like COVID and stuff, like who knew that was going to happen? And if you'd already had shares in something like an airline company, you'd lose out, right? And so, yeah, that's a good way to think of it. If you've got shares in all sorts of different places, then there's no need to kind of have that panic.
Yeah, and it just means that you don't have to spend all your time researching and keeping up to date. You know, if you had bought, I'll use an example, if you'd bought a share of a company where they were selling bikes which had big screens on them. That was a really cool, important thing in 2020 when everyone was at home. You couldn't exercise outside at the gym. So all these people bought these bikes. Now, that bike company thought, this is awesome. Everyone's buying these bikes. Let's make more bikes and let's hire more people and let's just double down on these bikes, not really thinking about, will people want these when everything opens up again?
Yeah.
And so that company's share price tanked because they had to lay off a lot of staff because they'd bought all these extra, machines and manufacturing items. And so if I had thought, I'm going to invest in this because I think this is where it's going, it's really difficult because you can't predict what a management of a company is going to do. So I like to think, okay, I'll take a risk by having that in a fund, but if it doesn't do so well, I don't have to keep reading the news and going, oh, wait, they've just laid off 10% of their staff. Now I have to quickly sell my shares.
And things change too, right? It goes up and down. So even if it's down here at the moment and something happens, it could always come back up again, right? Yeah. Okay. I feel like I'm sort of getting it.
Does it still seem confusing?
It seems still a little bit overwhelming, but I think it's just the stigma, of it. And growing up, what I found really interesting in the first pages of your book that I really related to was in movies, how women are kind of seen as not being good with their money. And I found that really interesting. One of my favourite movies is that Confessions of a Shopaholic, how she can't afford to, it's so good. She can't pay her rent because she just shops and things. So I think maybe it's just that stigma that it's just there, but it's just getting rid of that and not having that fear, I think. And then, like you say, just making sure I actually do my research and then some of the anxiety will go away.
Did you also think about how you are a good saver? And that's the first part, that's the difficult part. Yeah. Because, it's all well and good to learn how to invest, but if you don't have the money to invest, that's a huge issue. And, for some people, that is something that they cannot help. And that's a completely different story. But for a lot of us, there is possibly an extra $10 we can invest a week. Yeah. But we'll save it and we'll be really good savers, but we think that we can't be good investors.
Yeah, that's so true. Because my mindset is kind of I've got to have lots of money, right, to be an investor. I've got to be, super rich to start investing. But that's not the case. And I think a lot of people feel that way as well.
I feel like that was absolutely my thought process growing up, and it was only when I heard the idea that investing isn't what you do when you're wealthy, investing is what you do to grow your wealth, that really hit home for me, because I thought you would invest once you had the nice house and the car and you had a boat outside and you're like, oh, what do I do with the spare cash? Let me just invest it.
Totally.
But even our governments, when we think about how they're making sure that we can retire, we don't give them our KiwiSaver for them to save it. We give them our KiwiSaver and they invest it. And even they know that investing is the best way long term, slowly and surely over time, to give you that nest egg.
That's a good thing that you talk about KiwiSaver as well, because I think sometimes I just forget that KiwiSaver is an investing kind of tool. So it's some people are investing, they don't realize they are. So
exactly,
it's not as scary, right?
Yeah,
if you think about that.
You're already doing it.
I've got KiwiSaver, so yeah.
So whenever you started your KiwiSaver, that's when you started being an investor.
So I can already say I'm an investor. That's actually kind of cool.
It's important.
Thank you so much for your time today. I feel like I've learned so much. But for anyone who's listening, they've made it this far, thank you for listening this far. If you have made it this far, what would be your one tip, your main takeaway if someone forgets everything they've learned in this episode, they can go away with one little bit of advice?
I think the one piece of advice that I wish I had gotten earlier when I started my journey is you don't need to know everything about investing to be an investor. You don't need to wait, because I think what I see a lot of our own friends do, and probably something that we did ourselves, was we would think, well, I need to know it all before I put in a single dollar into my investing account. I need to be able to have a degree in investing before I can start investing. And the truth is, most people start off with a bit of knowledge. They listen to a podcast, they read a book, they do what they do to feel comfortable. And as long as you have your parameters, as long as you know why you're investing, how much you want to invest till, and what sort of goal that looks like, and what your risk profile is, then you can work backwards and you can always change your investing style. You know, you can start with a little bit of money and go, I really want to buy these shares. And you go in and maybe they don't do so well. And you're like, okay, that's fine because now I can change, I can pivot. I think one of the biggest fears people have is how I start investing is how I'll invest for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that's not the true way that you'll invest. When I started, I invested in, you know, things that I don't invest in anymore. When I started, there were companies I invested in that, you know, over time I was like, those don't really align with me. And I sold them. And most of my portfolio now is funds that I believe in. And it's something that can be a set and forget option. It's not something that you have to worry about all the time.
To wrap up, could you quickly tell people where to go to get more information? Because obviously you have an amazing podcast on Spotify, but do you have any other tools and things that you would tell people to head over to?
If you like reading, the book Girls That Invest is a good place to start. It's very simple. It's only 250 pages, and it explains investing in a way that after you read the book, you should be able to invest. And we have a lot of people that read the book and go, okay, what else is there? And I'm like, this is enough to be an investor. But it's that idea of, oh my God, I just need to know everything. I promise you, ask any investor out there. We don't know everything in the market, but we know enough to invest based on our risk tolerances.
Awesome. And I can say I thought it would be a hard read, and it actually was quite an easy read. So I feel, and it's funny. You're funny as well. I love there's a few Kardashian jokes in there, and I just love that because I'm like all about having a little bit of humour in a topic that can be quite serious. Hey,
why not?
Yeah,
why not?
It was so great having Sim on the first ever episode of Jess Learns to Invest. I hope you learned as much as I did today. If you want to find out more about Sim, go and give Girls That Invest a listen on wherever you get your podcasts. You can even head to their website, www.girlsthatinvest.com. We'll see you next time. The content of this podcast is of a general nature and is not financial advice. The thoughts and opinions of guest speakers are not those of the FMA. The FMA recommends that our audience seek advice in respect to investing from a regulated financial advisor. The FMA does not accept responsibility for any loss that any person may suffer from following it.